Alright, Joe, I'm going live if it works. Alright, I think we might be live. Hopefully this is all working. I'll give it just a second to catch up and make sure everything's good before we get started. Give everybody about a minute still to hop in. If there are any problems, you guys can't hear me or anything, just please let me know. But it looks like everything's running. There's just a little bit of a delay here. How's everybody doing today? And hi, everybody that's already said hello there. Oh no, sounds bad. Okay, let me try turning it down just a little bit. Is this any better? Oh yeah, I can see it kind of going up there. How about right about here? Does this sound okay? If this is better, we can get going in a second. I know there's still a little bit of a delay though on turning it down. Let's go over questions real quick. So yep, audio is bad. Hopefully, oh, it's still too much. Okay, we'll turn it down just a little. There. Got it all the way down in the green. It shouldn't be hitting the yellow. Hopefully that's good. Sorry about that. Totally different recording setup here. Yeah, let me double check one more thing. Okay. Sorry about the sound here. Let's just test this real quick. Okay. How is this? Sorry, this is taking so long just to get the sound right. Hopefully this is better. It's way, way down. Okay. Now we could actually get going. All right, thanks, Marcus. It's awesome. Okay, so I wanted to, I guess, just start by thanking everybody for coming and being here. We have meetups basically every week, and they're open, and it's usually just a small group of developers talking about code stuff, Unity development stuff, usually bigger architectural problems, but all kinds of different stuff. Okay, I'll just move the mic away too. Hopefully that sounds better. So anyway, if anybody's interested in joining that, we have them pretty much every Wednesday, so feel free to drop by, say hi. It's just a round table. We just talk and chat and solve problems. So if you got problems and stuff, yeah, come by and say hi and visit and help out and stuff. It's a lot of fun. Today, though, I wanted to do something a little bit different and do a little presentation on unit testing in Unity. I've done a talk on this a couple times before in person, and that was probably about a year ago was the last time I did it, and I really wanted to kind of go over the stuff that I've learned that's different, the new things I've learned since I did that talk, and how I've been using unit testing in a real project, and how I think people can start to integrate tests into their own projects and make things quite a bit easier for themselves. The main project I've been doing it on is this MMO. Check out pantheonmmo.com. I think that's the page. You see the game, but it's just a large-scale game, and it's the kind of thing where unit tests really make sense. So if you have a big project that you've got dozens of people working on that you're going to be working on for a very long time, unit testing will, I think, really pay off there. If you're just doing little throwaway projects, it's less helpful, but it still can be helpful. And I'm going to kind of go over a little bit of all of that as we go through stuff. First, I just wanted to start off with my first slide here. You can see them all, but a little spoiler of what's to come, and then lots of code to come after that. It's pantheonmmo.com. Somebody asked what the URL for the game was. Anyway, let's get going here. So what is testing? There are really just 3 different types of testing that I'm going to talk about today. There's unit tests, which are kind of the primary thing that we're going to focus on today, which generally test a small unit of code. They test a chunk of code or a set of functionality. Integration tests that test kind of the seams between different systems or different, even whole different environments. An integration test could include everything from all the way from the UI to the database and saving stuff, or it could be going through like the entire process of a checkout or something. They're generally a lot more complicated, a lot harder to write, and a lot easier to break. They'll break more often, I guess. And you'll end up with a lot more unit tests than integration tests. The other thing I wanted to talk about really briefly was TDD, which is test-driven development, which is it's a system where instead of writing code first, we write tests first, we make the test fail, and then we write the code to make the test pass. And it's kind of a process where you don't write code without a failing test first. So you always write the failing test to kind of earn the right to write the code. We're not going to be doing TDD today. I don't really do TDD day to day. I've seen it work great on web stuff, and I do it occasionally, a little bit in some parts of projects, but I definitely don't go full on TDD where I expect myself to write tests for everything before I write the code. Maybe I should, might be a good idea. I know a lot of people who do it, really love it and recommend it, but I've still struggled with it. So what we're really going to talk a lot about today is unit tests and the ways that you can get these working relatively quickly and just kind of get them into your project and start seeing some payoff and some benefit. Now, what those benefits are on slide 3 here, which is that why testing helps. And there are really, these were the 3 biggest things that came to mind when I was thinking about it and talking to other developers about it. And the first thing is that testing or unit tests really verify that your code works. So they'll verify that your code works when you write it, so you know that, hey, this code does what I think it does. I don't even have to run the code. I can just run the test and know that it does it. But it also verifies it after somebody else has changed it. So if I'm in there working on something and I make a change to something that might interact with somebody else's code, if that code is tested, I'll know that I've broken something. So if I go in there, I break it, I make a change that their code is relying on, and the change has busted that, the test is going to tell me right away, hey, you've broken this, go figure it out, or go talk to somebody else. The other thing you get is documentation. So you get a little bit of free documentation of the code, and you'll see that when I show a couple tests. The tests actually, if they're written right and written to describe things right, they'll explain what the code is doing and how the code works. So they'll show you how to use the code in the future. You can kind of read through and see stuff that I see a lot of talk still about the audio. Sorry about that. I'll try to fix it. I don't know what happened, but something busted with my audio streaming. So I'll also do a full version of this that's recorded and edited later in case it's too terrible for anybody. But back to documentation. So you bring in a new developer, and a new developer is looking at the system. They go, hey, I don't know how this system works. I'm going to try to figure it out. And if they just hit Shift F12, which in Visual Studio Writer is find all references, if there's one use of it and it's just where that code's actually called, they can maybe debug it and track down what's going on. But if you have a suite of unit tests against that public method or that API, whatever it is, the code that they're trying to figure out, probably some system in your game, if you have a bunch of unit tests against it, they can not only see how it works, but how it's supposed to work in all of the different situations with the different code. So what you expect it to do given different scenarios and setups. And it really helps explain how the code works. It also, I didn't put it here, but if you're writing code with unit tests, the code that you write tends to be a lot cleaner. It's just a side effect of the separation that you get that well, from using interfaces and separating and cleanly putting seams in your code so that it can be testable. The end result just ends up a lot cleaner. And the final thing here is this preventing bugs from regressing, which is kind of what I talked about earlier with breaking other people's code. But this is more of a setup or a scenario where you're working on some code and you go in and you fix a bug, right? And you're like, hey, I got to go change this old thing because this is causing a bug in my code. You commit it, it's good, everything's fine. A week later, some other developer comes in. It's like, hey, look, oh, my thing is broken. Oh, somebody changed this. I need to change this back to fix it so that my code works. They go back in, they change it, and now your original thing that you committed is busted, and maybe you pull the code down and go, oh, hey, that's broken again. Let me go change that again. And the bugs just keep coming back and forth because nobody realizes that they're breaking code in something that they're not really familiar with or something they're not interacting with a lot. If this code is all under test, they're going to know immediately why it's doing the thing that it's doing and what they're breaking in the process. So this is, I'd say, a very big one, especially once you get onto a team with more than just yourself. So let's look at what an actual unit test looks like. We'll look at my damage calculator class first, and I'll explain my weird naming in just a second. So let's pull up my first unit test setup. Is this the right one? Yep, there we go. Unit testing in Unity. So we're going to open up an actual script here, and I'm going to open the one in my test folder, and it's going to be this damage calculator tests. So we'll pull this thing up, and let's maximize it and zoom it way in so everybody can get a good look at it. So the first thing you notice is it's just got a little namespace for tests. That's automatically there just because of the folder structure when I created the test. The next thing is that we have a public class with a kind of screwy naming convention. So the naming here doesn't really matter. There's no technical reason that you have to name your tests any differently or any specific way, just like anything in C#. There's no technical reason that we use Pascal case for classes, but normally we do. What I like to do personally with my tests is keep them all lowercase in the class and use underscores. It's the only place other than right before a private field where I like to use underscores. But I like it just because it becomes very, very obvious that this is a test to me. I know that I would never write code that looked like this that wasn't a test, where I have everything underscored and lowercase. So I put my class here as damage calculator because I'm going to test my damage calculator. And then inside this class, I have a method, and I have this one public method that has a test attribute on it. And the test attribute is just going to tell the editor and writer that this is a unit test that we want to be able to run, so you should know about it. Go figure out how to run it. Then I give my test a name, so I've got public void sets damage to half at 50% mitigation. Relatively long message here, or name for this test, but the benefit is that I can tell exactly what I'm testing. I want to make sure that my damage calculator sets the damage to half if I'm at 50% mitigation. If I had like calculate damage returns 5 when I put in 0.5 or something, I could come up with a million really hard to understand names, or names where I'm going to have to go look at the test to figure out what it is. And my entire goal with the naming of the class and the test is to make sure that I don't need to read the test to know what it's testing. I might need to go investigate it if something breaks, like, hey, the test broke, why did it break? I want to go check that out. But in general, I shouldn't need to read the test to know what it's actually testing. So here we've got my test, and you saw the name, and let's take a look at what it's actually doing. On line 10, we create an integer named mitigated damage, and we set it to our damage calculator's calculate damage result. So here I'm calling calculate damage with a value of 10 and a mitigation of 0.5. Nothing special. Let's go look at calculate damage real quick. It's a very, very simple method just to keep this extremely simple for our first example. We're going to get into quite a bit more complicated examples as we go through things. But the calculate damage right here, you see, nice and simple. It's just a static method that returns an int, and we're just multiplying original damage by mitigation. And you see why it's actually wrong in a minute. So we go here and we multiply that, we get our result, our calculated damage, and then we assert here on line 11 that these values are equal. So this is how we check to see that the test has passed or failed. Right here we're doing a little bit of work, we're just calculating the damage. And here we're saying, hey, if this test, well, it only passes if the expected value is the actual value, or the actual value is our expected, is I guess really the way to say it. So this should pass if mitigated damage is 5 and fail if it's not 5. So we can actually go into Unity and run that test, or I could run them from Rider. I don't want to show the Rider part yet though. Let's go into Unity. So if I go back into Unity and I have my test runner window open, let me just close it and just show you how to reopen it. I go to Window, General, Test Runner. As long as everything compiles and it all works, I should see my tests right here. And I'll see them with no circle on them because I haven't run them. And it's filtered down by the assembly, then the namespace, and then the class. So here's my damage calculator one. And then here's the actual test here. So it's assembly, namespace, class, method. This one only has one method that's not commented out, so this is the one test in here. I can select that test and just hit run selected, run my test, and you'll see that it actually passed. So we did get half the damage, which is what we would expect to do. There is a bug in that calculation though, you'll see that in just a little bit, but this test right here isn't really exposing that. In fact, I kind of want to show how to expose that, but first I want to talk about how you can make tests, because if you can't get into this part and actually create a test and do that, you might want to follow along. It'd be a pain in the ass. So let's make it so that you can create your own tests. So to create a test, if you don't have any tests already, all you need to do is open up this test runner, and when you're in edit mode, you're going to see it show a button here that says create a folder for edit mode tests. If you hit that button, you'll get a folder and it'll be named, I think, edit tests, or get some name. You can rename it to whatever you want, but it's going to create this test folder here. In fact, let me do one for play mode. Let me delete my play mode folder real quick and I'll show you what it looks like. So if I go to play mode, you see this create play mode test assembly folder. What you're going to see on the edit mode is create edit mode assembly folder. And if you hit create on there, it's going to create a folder. You give it a name, like I give this play tests. We'll talk about play mode tests in just a little bit too. And then this is just going to create a folder that has an assembly definition file in it. Sorry, I don't think I can zoom. This is a bad resolution for this. I'll be right back into code in just a moment though. So I've created it and I've got this folder, and it comes with this assembly definition file. This is a very important part. This is kind of the reason that I wanted to show it. When you have a play mode test, the assembly definition file is going to look just like this. It's going to have override references on. You're going to have an assembly reference for nunit.framework.dll. If this is missing, it's not going to work as a test folder. You won't be able to run tests in there. So this is kind of the thing that it's adding. You're also going to have these two assembly definition references. And if you don't have these, or you're trying to manually create one of these, you can always hit plus, hit the little circle, and then go find them. It's unityeditor.testrunner and unityengine.testrunner. So once those are both in there and you have the assembly reference, you're almost ready to do tests. The main difference here now between play mode tests and edit mode tests is just this platform selection. So in play mode, it's got any platform selected. And if I go to my edit mode folder, this test folder, you see that I only have editor selected. I also have end substitute up here, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit when we get to it. The other way that you can do tests like this, by the way, is to have them in an editor folder. That's, I think, kind of the old way to do it, and I'd avoid it if you don't necessarily need it. Going with assembly definitions helps a lot, but there's one other little requirement that I need to point out, and that's in this assembly definition references, I'm also referencing my scripts. Because I'm not in the editor folder, I need to reference this. I believe there's supposed to be a way to automatically reference all of these assemblies, but I haven't quite figured out how that works or gotten it working, so I want to show how to set this up real quick. So I have my scripts referenced right here, and to do that, I had to go into my scripts folder where I've written these couple little C# scripts, and I created an assembly definition, and you'll see it right there. It's named scripts. If you don't know how to create one, by the way, just go to the folder, right click, go to create, and search for assembly definition. You hit that, it'll create the new file, and then you'll have something that looks just like this. And I didn't really change anything, I just left it alone. The default settings were fine. I want it to work on any platform. An assembly definition, by the way, is kind of like a project or a DLL in Windows land. It's an external project or assembly that you can reference, but here it's not really external, it's all in in the project, and it allows us to control what relies on what. In this case, it's just saying that our tests rely on the scripts, so we need to have a reference to that definition. Now again, to set that up, I go to tests, on the tests, and this wasn't here, so I clicked plus, I hit the little button, and I found my scripts one, added it, and hit apply, and I was good. So once you've done all of that, you'll be able to actually run these tests. Now let's dive back into the actual unit tests. So let's see, back to full screen and back to zoom mode. Hopefully that wasn't too fast. I was just trying to give a real quick explanation of how you'd actually set it up and be able to run the tests. Also, once you do the test folder creation, just hit play once, make sure that everything compiles, and then come in and start actually working on your tests. So we actually have a problem with this test, or with this method, this calculate damage method. It doesn't quite do the right thing. In fact, if we write another test, we can see that. So I'm going to copy this test, lines 7 through 12. I just selected them all, put them on my clipboard with Control-C, go down here, paste it, and I'm going to say sets it to quarter at 75% mitigation. So I should only take a quarter of the damage at 75% mitigation. Or you know what, let's say it sets it to 2 damage at 80% mitigation. Let's make it very obvious. So if we put the mitigation to 80%, which is 0.8, so 1 is 100%, 0%. And then here we'll just assert that we got back 2. So if we calculate 10 damage with 80% mitigation, we're going to expect that we take 2 damage. So I'll save that off. We'll go back over to Unity, go to my edit mode tests, because I haven't made play mode tests, and then go select this test and run it. Oh, it wants to update my assembly definition. There we go. We run it and we see that we're getting an error. So the error is saying that it expected 2, but the value was 8. And if we look at the actual code here, let's maximize this, and we go into calculate damage, you can actually, if you think about it for a moment, if we put in a 0.8 here, so we have 80% mitigation, and we have original damage of 10, we're going to return back 8. That's not what we want. A mitigation would generally be like a damage reduction amount. So we really want 1 minus that mitigation, which is what we have right here. So we want something more like this, where we're taking 1 and then subtracting the mitigation to get the final percent. In fact, we could put that into a float, like float multiplier equals 1f minus mitigation. And then we multiply it by that multiplier instead. So that way, if we have 80%, we're reducing it by 80% or multiplying it by 0.2. So we've saved that off, and if I go back over here now and run my tests again, this test should start passing. There we go. So now both of these tests pass. So these were, again, very, very, very simple tests, and I want to go on to something that's a little bit more complicated and how we start moving these systems or combining these systems. And for that one, yeah, that one's just rounding it because we're just using integers and we're just going to 8. Or if we did 75%, we'd have gone to mitigating 80% just because we're not using a float right there. Okay, so let's jump back into the code. So if we go back into our damage calculator tests, oh, well, actually, let me jump back to the slides for 1 second. There are probably a couple other slides that were worth explaining. Next, yeah, edit mode versus play mode. I want to talk on this really quickly, which is just that edit mode tests are generally faster. They're tests that the majority of my tests are. So most unit tests that I write are edit mode tests. They're not play mode tests. But play mode tests actually do have some really good benefits. They work great for mono behaviors. In fact, they're kind of the only way that you can test a mono behavior. And they're not really hard to do anymore. What happens is with a play mode test, when you run the test, it's going to start up a brand new blank scene. It's going to run your code, create any game objects that you need to create. So you tell it, create a new game object, add this component. It will create all of those. It'll run the code just kind of as you set in yields. It'll wait and do whatever it's supposed to do, and then you can assert on that. Of course, because you're starting up a scene and doing all of this creation, it's quite a bit slower, and most of the time I prefer to minimize testing monobehavior skin because it's just a little bit slower, a little bit clunkier, and not really necessary for a lot of things. But for certain things, you definitely need it. If you want to test motion or movement or a lot of physics interactions, things like that, you can do those really well in play mode tests. And again, it used to be super painful to do. You used to have to go in and lay things out in the scene, save the scene off and all that. Now you can just write them in code. I was surprised and amazed when I found that out, and they seem to work really well. Assembly definitions, I talked about those for just a moment, and end substitute we're going to get onto really quickly. So let's go into some more actual tests. And here I want to test, well, let's see, should we test out more mitigation stuff? I don't think we need to, because this is kind of that same test that I did right up there. Let's go into some other bigger tests where we're testing some NPCs that are doing damage to each other and calculating with each other's damage and their own mitigation and all that kind of more complicated stuff. To do that, we'll open up this combat system file. So this is a set of tests for a very simple static combat system. Here, we'll start with the basic one. And the first test that I have in here is just that my combat system doesn't allow NPCs to process attacks against themselves. This is the kind of thing that you would probably want to put into your game just to watch out for bugs so that an NPC doesn't start hitting themselves, right? I'm sure it's happened to me, it's probably happened to everybody, where your NPC is trying to find what things to aggro on, it finds itself in the list, there's nothing checking it, and then it starts beating itself and kills itself, right? Happens all the time to me, at least, or at least it's happened many times, and I've seen it happen a lot. So how do we do that? Well, here I've got an NPC class, and I'm creating a new NPC. I give him a damage of 5, and we'll look into what this NPC looks like in just a minute. He's full of interfaces and lots of fun stuff, so I don't want to make it too complicated yet. So we got the NPC, he's got a damage of 5, and here I cache his starting health. So I just get the starting health and health. I call combat system.processAttack, and in process attack, if you look on the screen right there, it takes an attacker and a defender, and I'm passing in the NPC as the attacker and the defender. And then after acting on it, I assert that the health hasn't changed. The starting health is equal to my actual health. And I really should have mentioned this, by the way. I should have mentioned the entire layout of a unit test is generally arrange, act, assert. And the arrange part is kind of setting up the test. In this case, it's relatively simple. So this would be like our arrange area, where we're setting up by creating the NPC and caching this value. This is the act area. This is where we're running the code that we're actually testing. So here we're testing process attack to make sure that it actually does the right thing. And then here's the assert area, which is the third part of the test, the AAA. And here we're just making sure that the thing that we acted on did what it was supposed to do and not something else, or that it didn't do what we wanted it to not do, whatever it is. So let's take a look at this. Let's see what process attack looks like and if it passes or not. Well, why don't we run it first, actually. So go back into here, go back to Unity, expand out my test, and just say to the does not allow NPCs to attack themselves. Yeah, it passes. So let's go look at the code. So we'll go in here and maximize this again. And I'm just gonna, if you hold Control, by the way, and click on these, works in Visual Studio and Writer, it goes right in. All right, so how does our combat system work? Combat system has this process attack. We had that attacker and the defender. Remember, we're passing in the NPC for both of these in the test. And here on line 5, we're checking to see if the attacker is the defender, and we return. Now again, if somebody comes in and makes a change to this and accidentally deletes that while they're refactoring and changing something else, or they're renaming these methods and moving things away, we're going to know. We're going to get a failure immediately. So if I took that check out and I go back in and run the test again, so once it compiles, something's not working. It should be failing. Let's see why it's not failing. Always good when stuff doesn't work right in a demo, but you know what? We can debug it and we can figure out why. So let's see what's actually happening here. Because this is actually, I think it's a pretty good example, because my test is passing and it shouldn't be. So let's figure out what's going on here and why that's happening. So I'm in Rider, and I put a breakpoint right here. I just clicked in this little area right next to the light bulb, and we're going to hit F5 to attach. I'm also going to take a drink because I'm getting thirsty. Oh, do you think I didn't save? That's possible. Usually I hit Control-Shift-B every time I tab out, just as a habit, just because it forces a build and makes it save, but we'll find out in a second. So let's run the test again. Now that I've attached, so again, I hit F5 in Rider, and you can see it's doing a little bit of attaching there, and I can hit Run Selected, and I should hit my breakpoint. So I hit it, I tab back in here, and it's yellow because I'm debugging at that breakpoint. Now I can hit F11. Hopefully that's not bound to anything stupid, no BS. Good, didn't stop streaming. And then I can step in and figure out what's going on here. So we're getting a damage of 5, and we have the defender, but it should be failing. This thing should be taking damage. So I'm gonna put another breakpoint down here and just hit F5 and figure out. So our calculated damage is 0. Why is our, oh, I know why our damage, I don't know why our damage is 0. Let's see. So let's scroll back up here and watch this. We'll hit F11. I don't know if you guys knew you could do that, by the way. You can just drag the execution up. Works most of the time, works great in Rider. Usually works in Visual Studio too, but I think you have to turn the option on, at least in some versions. So here we are, we'll go into calculate damage and see what that's doing. So we're getting damage by character type. We have a character type of none. Oh no, there's a bug right here. So we have it says character type, this should be an NPC type. So another one of the pieces of code in here is calculate damage for character type or NPC type. So this is checking for like a tank, a caster, or a healer, right? And if we put in none, so we don't have a character type, I'm actually returning 0, and really I want to return back the original damage. So I actually found a bug in that code by fixing or watching this other test pass that I knew should fail. Which is kind of interesting. By the way, this wasn't a bug before. I just accidentally deleted all my code. There we go. So I deleted it all and then had to recreate it all like 20 minutes before. But I think we're good again. So the test is now failing like we would expect. So now it is allowing him to attack himself. And again, this would generally happen because some other developer came in and changed your code or changed it because they didn't know what it was there for, or they accidentally screwed it up. They deleted something on accident that they didn't mean to. So let's go back and fix that. So if we go back to our combat system and we just re-add that check, our test will pass again. Oh, kind of a cool test, but not a super complicated test. Let's go into something a little bit better. And we'll go into processing an attack against a valid target deals damage. So here, say we want to check that our attack actually does the amount of damage, or at least does some damage, that it's reducing the health of the target. So here I've got an attacker set up as a new NPC that's got a damage of 5, and we've got a target, and I cache their starting health. We'll process the attack, and then we'll assert that they took damage. Let's see how that works. So go back over to Unity, and we'll run that test, and oh, that one actually passes now. So now I know that, hey, if I do damage and my thing has damage on it, it's going to take damage. But I want to make sure that it doesn't if the damage is equal to 0. So if, say I do an attack and my attacker's damage is 0, then I want to make sure that he shouldn't actually lose health, right? There's nothing that should be happening causing his health to go down. So I can just copy my test, paste it down here, processing an attack against a valid target with 0 damage, deals no damage. And my name got really long there, but I don't mind because I can read it and I can tell what I'm testing. So here I've set the damage to 0 on the attacker, and now I just want to assert that these values are equal, because really the health shouldn't change from the starting health. It should be exactly the same. So it's expected and then actual. So I actually have these in the opposite order. So I'll move starting health over here and put that health there. And technically the test will pass either way, but if you put the expected in the right field, then the message will be correct. And you really want a correct message when things fail. What's the point of having a bad message just because I was too lazy to move them back and forth now? So this will give me a test then that tells me, hey, this thing's going to fail if the damage is 0, or it's not going to do any damage if the damage is 0. And I can go back over to Unity and run that test. In fact, let's see if my unit tests show up in here. So this time I'm not going to do it in Unity. I'm going to go into Writer. Well, let's go click on Unity just to make sure it updated. And I'll go back into Writer. And if you go down here to the unit test section in Writer, you can actually see your tests in this section too, and you can just run them from right down here. So I could find this test, processing an attack against a valid target, deals 0 damage, and barring any weird problems, the test will run, and I can actually get the result without ever going back into Unity. Now this is a huge thing for me. The next thing I'm going to get to is even bigger, the substitutions and interfaces. But being able to run the tests from Writer without having to go back into Unity, without having to restart my game, without having to, especially in a big game where I have a server and a client, without having to restart the server and the client to check every single change that I make, I can just write a test, run the test, make the changes until the test passes and I think it's good. Once I have a couple tests over it, then I can kick off the actual app, run the game, and go through and make sure that my tests aren't lying to me, that I'm getting the behavior that my tests say I'm getting, and that I'm not missing anything. But generally, I can bypass a lot of the slowness of that process of starting things up and retesting manually just by running tests right in Writer, not having to go back. Now, if your project's small enough, it might not be an issue. But in some big ones, it can be a giant nightmare just going back and forth. All right, so there we go. We've got a couple neat tests, but we haven't hit the thing that is probably the biggest issue for me, and that is the fact that we're coding against this NPC that we haven't even looked at. We've got this NPC class, we haven't taken a peek at it, and I want to go look into it, see what all it's doing, and then see how it can become a lot harder as soon as it's in mono behavior. Because a lot of the time, you're going to be in an actual existing project and you don't have the luxury to just go create a bunch of new classes from scratch that aren't mono behaviors and then figure out how you're going to tie those in with mono behaviors and get all that working. So we can get around it, and I've had to do that for the last year, and I want to show just kind of how I did that. All right, so let's take a quick peek. I guess first let's just look at the NPC, and then I'll show you the mono behavior version of it and how we go about testing that. So we've got an NPC class here, and it implements this iNPC interface. If you're not familiar with an interface, it's a description or a contract for a thing that a class will do. It tells the rest of the code that this NPC class will do whatever this interface says it'll do. And if I hit F12 and go to the interface, you'll see that it's actually, well, kind of confusing, because the interface has 3 other interfaces after it, which means that this interface is actually kind of a combination of all 3 of these plus the code down here. So I've got in it, I have a NPC type property named NPC type with a getter. So this is what this is saying is that anything that implements iNPC must have a public property that has at least a public getter. It doesn't have to have a public setter, but it has to be readable publicly. It has to be named NPC type and of NPC type. And if I go back into my NPC, see that I have that property right here. And if I delete that and save, I'm going to get an error message saying the interface member is not implemented. But I can go hit Alt-Enter and hit Implement Missing Members, and Writer will fix that right back up for me. Now let's go back to that interface one more time, because it did have 3 other interfaces on it. So this interface is really a combination of a couple interfaces. There are a couple different things that I want to describe about NPCs, and I have a couple ways that I could do that. I could put all of these interfaces on the NPC, but I don't necessarily want to, because this NPC might already be kind of a big class that's got stuff on it, and I don't want to just build this other I guess I don't want to just take all of these and drop these onto NPC independently, and I like to just put a single interface there that kind of combines all of the interfaces. And that might be a bad practice, I'm not really sure, but it's just the way that I like to do it and the way that feels the cleanest to me. Now let's look at these other interfaces just really briefly. So I Take Damage has a health on it with a getter, and this one's the only one that's a little bit different because it also has a public method called Take Damage that requires an amount. So our NPC has to have this health and it has to have take damage. And if we go look at it, see that it has the health and it has the take damage. Now the getter on this health is public, but the setter is actually private because the interface doesn't say that we have to have it be public. So we can make it private, and we should if we can, because the main reason for that is we don't want to expose things that we don't want being changed outside of our class. And we generally don't want NPC health being changed by anything other than the NPC. And here, by the way, we're setting a default value. And you can do that on properties as of .NET 4.5 something, I think. Whatever. The latest versions of Unity, you can definitely do that. And I do it all the time. Great. So what the hell is the point of all these interfaces, right? Like, went over what they are, why do they exist, why do we actually need them? And we need them for this. Say our NPC is not a new class. It's existing, it's in there, or it's a mono behavior that's part of a prefab and it has some other stuff on it. So it's like that. It's a mono behavior and I build and I want to run some tests. Watch what's going to happen to all of my tests. So we'll go back in here, and any of these tests that require me to have an NPC, look at that, I run it and it's going to be really tiny on this text. But right here it says, you're trying to create a mono behavior using the new keyword. This is not allowed. Mono behaviors can only be added using add component. You've seen this before, right? I assume most of us have seen this before. The issue is that you can't just go create a new mono behavior. You have to create a game object and you have to attach the mono behavior to the game object using add component. But I mentioned that writing play mode tests isn't always the easiest thing, and it's not necessarily what I want to do because I'm not testing the NPC here. If we look at it, none of these methods on here are really being tested other than take damage is kind of being tested when I check to see that the health went down. But really, this part I can test independently. I can test that take damage works without doing all of these combat system tests. What I want to actually test is that take damage is getting called with the right amount. So we can do that, and we can do that without breaking anything and while still using mono behaviors, and that's what we're going to show next. And that all relies on mocks and substitutions. So before I show exactly how to do it, I want to show how to set it up because it's a pain. I had to go look at one of my old videos just to remember where to get the thing at. So let's pull up my beautiful sheet right here, or my slides. And if you look at this n substitute slide, or if you just search for n substitute, right? Just go in and grab n substitute from NuGet, and you can find it on the latest version. What you need to do though is download it. So you download the whole package, like grab whatever 4.21, then open it up and then go to this folder, which is very, very strange, right? You're going to go to the docs folder, downloads, then go to the n substitute 2.0.3.0.zip. And then in that zip, there's a lib folder and a .NET 3.5 folder. In that .NET 3.5 folder, you'll find the latest version of nsubstitute that actually works with Unity. Take that file, that nsubstitute DLL, and you'll put it right into your plugins/editor folder. So you're going to have this little nsubstitute DLL that you can download. It should look just like this in your import settings. When you pull it in, it'll work fine. Just hit the editor checkbox, should automatically be checked when you hit that, and then you'll be good to go with nsubstitute. And you're going to love it because nsubstitute makes all of this kind of magically just work. So let's show how that happens now. So remember, I can't create a new mono behavior. So I want to use this substitution library to give me a fake version of the NPC. Now, if we look at our NPC again, remember, it implements this INPC interface, but let's look at our process attack. Our process attack is actually set up right now to use interfaces. In fact, it was the whole time. I didn't make this take direct concrete implementations of the NPC. I just made it take the parts of the interface that we needed. So the attacker part, with the data that we need from the attacker, is really just the damage. So the IAttack interface is just the damage property right here. We don't have anything else on it, just the one little piece that we need. The defender is this INPC because we need a bit more from it. We're actually looking at its inventory, which you might not have even known it had. We're looking at, what are we looking at over here? The NPC type. In fact, let's get this down here so that it's on a new line and a little bit easier to read. So we're looking at the NPC type, the damage of the attacker, and the defender's inventory, but we're also calling take damage on the defender. So we need a lot of the NPC related stuff. For the attacker, we just need the attack. So what we want to do is get interfaces instead of concrete implementations of these NPCs, because we don't really care about the concrete implementation. We want to test the combat system. This is, remember, our part that we're acting on. This is the act. This is the arrange. So we don't care about the arrange. We can substitute out almost as much as we need as long as the parts that are vital to the combat system are there and are the real ones. And here it's a static class, so it's really just that. So how do we do that? We take our NPC and we're going to change this to INPC attacker. In fact, we don't even need it to be INPC. We can just make it IAttacker or IAttack attacker. Now we can't make that a new NPC. We also can't make it a new IAttack because you can't new up an interface. What we can do is type in substitute. Let's type that right. Substitute dot for, and then give it the generic type of IAttack and a semicolon at the end. Now this substitute only showed up for me because I already have the using and substitute thing up here. If you don't have the using statement, you'll need to go up there and just add it. So now that I've got that there, I can delete this because I can't put a constructor property there. And say I wanted to do the same for my target. We'll do the same. We just go INPC target equals substitute dot for, and we give it type of NPC or INPC. So now we've got a substitute NPC and a substitute attacker. In our NPC, it doesn't matter that it's a mono behavior. It doesn't matter that maybe it's a network object that we can't new up without connecting our client to our server and starting up another server. So the literal situation that I have for this, right? Like if we're doing this in an MMO, we don't want to have to start up an NPC or start up the entire network stack just to spawn an NPC to make sure that the mitigation properties are working right. We want this all to be instant. We want all of our tests to run in a couple seconds at most, maybe milliseconds. So if we're doing slow stuff, that's bad. So here we go. We've got an attacker, we've got a target, and well, this target health, if we just have not an NPC, this target health isn't actually going to be valid, right? Because on an interface, we're not giving it any valid default value for take damage. There's no way to set a default value on an interface. We're not newing up the NPC where we were setting the health. So we can't really check this. The other thing that we can't check is that the health has gone down because NPC's health isn't going to go down. So we need to do something a little bit different. We're going to delete that. And instead of asserting that the health went down, I want to do something a little bit different. And I want to assert that the method was called on the NPC. Let's look at that I take damage interface one more time. I want to assert that take damage was called for the right amount. So I don't care how the NPC takes damage. I want to know that when I process combat against something that takes damage, it takes the right amount of damage, or at least it's told to take the damage. How it takes the damage is up to that class, right? The NPC can handle how it takes damage. A wall can handle how it takes damage. Whatever the thing is taking damage can deal with that. But I want to make sure that my combat system tells it to. And to do that, I can say target dot received, and now this is only available because we're using a substitute. So I do received, and then I go to the end. Now that it does have an optional parameter for the number of times you want it received. 1 is the default though, so I just don't need to put it. And I just put in the name of the method. So I put in take damage. And I'm expecting it to take, well, right now, 0 damage because I'm not telling it how much damage. So that's about it, and I could delete that. But I don't really want to do one that takes 0 damage. Right? I mean, this would work, I think, but we probably shouldn't call take damage on that. In fact, let's comment out this test, make everything compile real quick, and give it a go. And then I'm going to show you how we can change that damage amount. So we'll build, compiled, hopefully everything's good. Yep, these are my only tests that were against that NPC. And if we come back in here, We should find my tests have rebuilt. Let's just run them all. And which test were we testing again? I've already forgotten the name of it. It was testing, processing, and attack against a valid target deals damage. Let's see, did it work? It actually didn't. So it did not deal damage, and we got a no reference exception. So how do we fix this? Yes, received does return a bool. By the way, I saw the question there. I know there are questions going by. I'm trying to keep an eye on them, but I'm trying not to get distracted too. Okay, so it's failing because of an exception here. And I want to take a look at this. So if we look at it, we can see right here, I know the text is tiny, but it's saying that the message is in, or the error is in process attack of a combat system on line 11. So I can go to combat system and look at process attack. In fact, I'll just go click on process attack and hit F12 on my keyboard. And then go to line 11 and see, oh, look, it's actually looking for an inventory on the defender. So it's expecting that this thing has an inventory on it. And that was fine before because in our NPC, we were creating a new inventory. Here, though, we have a substitute for it. And, well, we need to do something, right? We need to give it some sort of an inventory. Or either that or we're going to have to change that code and make the code not rely on an inventory. I don't want to do that, though. So what I want to do instead is give my target an inventory. To do that, I'll say inventory equals new inventory. We're just going to create a new one. It's not a mono behavior. If it were, I could mock it. But if we look here, it's just a list of items and gives us back the armor, the total value of armor from all of those items. So I'll create a new inventory. Then I'll say target dot, and this is another part of that nsubstitute library, inventory, and then I do dot returns. This one caught me for a little while. I wasn't quite sure how do I set things on these substitutes. So I tell it to return an inventory and save that, or that inventory. Now, I could technically do something like this, that it returns new inventory. What that's going to do, though, is every time I call inventory, it's going to create a new inventory and give me that one. So if I want to keep the state of this inventory or keep it around or not just create a new one every single time, I need to cache that and pass that one in. Otherwise, it's just going to create a new one every time. So there we go. You know, you might notice, like, we can do this returns. Why don't we do that for the damage as well? So we can say attacker.damage.returns, and we don't have to be an object, or we could just return back a number, and we'll give it like 5. Put that semicolon here, and then we can assert that we actually took damage here. So in the take damage, we can say that we're expecting 5 damage. So if I save that all off, again, Control-Shift-B to just build everything. And yes, the video, I'll do a fully edited version of the video afterward. I just kind of want to run through, hit all of the stuff, answer some questions, and do whatever I can to make it, the final version of it, as good as possible. Okay, so we've got that in there. We should be able to rerun our test. And there we go. It's passing now. So we're running our test against that combat system, even though our NPC theoretically, you know, our NPC is being used by these systems, but it doesn't have to be the concrete implementation, so we don't have to test the actual mono behavior, or in my case, the networked object that is extremely hard to create and takes a long time to get set up. So here we just go right away, we pass in that interface or the substitute, and everything just kind of works. I think I want to just jump over to taking some questions now. I've been going for almost an hour, so I want to see if anybody has questions about unit testing or the stuff here, or any other just specific stuff that you guys want to know about. There's a tiny bit of a delay on the video, so give me just a moment to answer, but feel free to ask away. I'll try to look up through some existing questions too. So there's some interest in play mode tests. Let's see, are plugins available? Yes, they're available. This stuff all works in every version of Unity. Oh, thanks for the nice comments and a couple people in there. And yeah, okay, so the only thing I see so far is play mode stuff. I did have some play mode stuff set up, but like I said, I kind of accidentally deleted all of my tests because I didn't put them under source control. But we can run through that process real quick, and I can just show you how to do a play mode test because I think they are pretty cool. And if anybody has questions, feel free to drop them in, and after we show a play mode test, we'll jump back over to the next question. So if we go to play mode, and I want to make some play mode tests, well, here I've got this folder. Let's just delete that. I'm going to create using the button right here. So we'll hit create play mode test assembly folder. Call this play tests. I think that is what I did. Maybe it just didn't work right. Well, that's weird. It didn't even create the assembly definition. Let's see if we can run. Okay, let's try that. So delete it and I'll create another folder, hit the button and just see if it does. Okay, so I got tests 1. We'll go with this. And then we're in this folder. Wait, why is it not letting me create a test? That's interesting. I'm not sure why it doesn't want to let us create a play mode test. It's a little strange. Oh, there we go. Create test script in the folder. I think the editor is just giving me a little problem. So let's call this move transform. We're just going to do a little test that tests that moving a transform maybe with a character controller works. So let's start this up. And I will get to the other questions, and there's some good ones coming up I already see. So if we want to do a play mode test and we create a new file, this is really the part that I like to look at. The other part's not as useful. So play mode tests and regular unit tests, like I said, they really just look the same when you actually look at the file now. They used to be completely different. Now they're very similar. The difference here, though, is with this unity test attribute. So if we put the unity test attribute on here and we have the IEnumerator return type, we can actually start stuff up, and this is how it's going to do that whole creating a scene. It's going to wait when we yield and run the code and let us test things that happen over time. So if we have game objects that we can control like this over time, and we want to test their movement or other game object related behavior that we can't test in an edit mode test, this is the way to do it. So let's set one up. To do that, we'll create a new game object. So let's say we're going to make a character. We'll say game object character equals new game object, and I'll just call it I'll call it Jason. I'll name him after myself. And then we're going to give him a character controller. So say character or add component character controller. And now here we're really going to be testing a character controller, which is not super useful. You probably want to test this against your own code, but again, we're just writing a simple play mode test to show how it works. So say character controller equals that. Equals. There we go, and make that a bar. Okay, hopefully everybody saw that, but what we're doing is just creating a character controller, adding it to the character, and assigning it here. Then we'll give it a velocity. And we'll give it a velocity of maybe vector, equals vector 3 dot forward. Right, so just tell it to move forward. Oh, wait, that's right. That's not what we want. We want to move it. Sorry. So really we want to just do like a move. Yeah, we want to move it forward, not give it a velocity forward. Thinking of my rigid bodies. So we tell it to move forward, and then we can assert that it has actually moved forward. So what we tell it to move forward, and then we can yield, and then assert that it's actually moved by going like so. Keep like, let's set the original position. Sorry guys, I wish I had a better prepared version of this test. So character.transform.position equals vector 3.0. We reset the position. And then, in fact, we don't necessarily even need that. We could just do like character.transform.position plus equals vector 3.forward. We can keep it really, really, really simple. And then just yield again and assert that the position actually moved. So we could say assert.r equal character.transform.position comma vector 3.1. So that's what let's add vector 3.1. Sorry, this is a terrible, terrible example of a play mode test. But here we just move it, yield, and move it again. What I think I would normally do though is just maybe, let's do it the right way. Let's give it a rigid body and add some force and verify that adding force moves the thing in the actual direction that we want to add force. Because I don't like this test at all. This is terrible. So we'll do var rigid body equals character.add component rigid body. Then we'll say rigid body dot add force, and we'll give it a vector 3 forward times 100. Then we'll yield return new wait for seconds of, I don't know, we'll wait 1 second. And then we'll assert that the position is actually forward. No, I didn't need the yields. That's why I was saying, like, it seemed all kind of pointless there. So we would go there, we'd make sure that it flew forward. So here we'd say like the new position is character.transform.position. And we could just assert that is true, new position dot x or z. Yeah, it's going to be, what are we doing? Vector forward, so it's going to be z is greater than 0. There we go. That's enough of a test, though, where we can see that if we're adding force in the forward direction, which is positive on the z, and then we wait for 1 second, that position should be greater than 0. Now, ideally, we would probably do a test to check specific movement to a specific spot, or one of the more recent ones that I wrote that's a little bit longer is to check that mapping your inputs move, so that if you press vertical, positive vertical, your character moves in the forward direction regardless of the way the character is facing. And you can set that all up with a slightly larger play mode test where you're actually checking the direction, asserting that the position is going in the right way. You can do a lot of those with play mode tests. You can also test UI stuff with play mode stuff. I haven't done that myself personally much. If anybody has, though, I'd really love to talk to them and just get an idea of what you're doing for these tests and how you're testing the UI code specifically with unit tests. I think I'll do a full video on play mode tests later, though, too, where I can kind of dive into this and give some really good examples that are a little bit better thought out. Let me jump back over to other questions real quick. So, how do you decide what to test, how much to test, and not overkill? Okay, so stuff to test. Well, I guess what I test is any code that's going to be around for a very long time. Any code that is going to be interacted with for a while, where people are going to keep changing it. It's actually going to be actively developed on. That's the stuff that I really want to have under test. If it's something that's a small project that I'm almost done with, I'm wrapping it up, it's going away, and I'm never going to touch it again, no tests, right? If it's a short project, like a hackathon or something, no tests. If it's a project that I'm going to be working on for 6 months, I'd like to have tests on as much stuff as possible. Now, it might feel a little slow too, right? Because sometimes we'll write these tests and it feels like we're doing a whole lot of writing tests for a little bit of code. What happens, though, and you'll see this as you start doing this more and more, is that you get a bit of a curve. There's a beautiful chart for this too. I think I've showed it in a couple videos. I wish I had it up with me right now. But the speed that you get from not testing early on is generally really quick. You'll get a lot of velocity. You'll start releasing things really quick. You can add features, add functionality. You'd be blazing along, just hacking stuff like, hey, we need a new feature. Let's put it in. Let's go as quick as possible. Anybody who's worked on a project for a really long time has probably seen that velocity slows down over time. It slowly dips and dips and dips and dips until eventually it flatlines, right? Like it gets to the point where you're getting, every time you put in a new feature, something else breaks, or you get scared to put in features because something else is going to break, or everybody else is afraid and nobody's making changes, or every change is heavily scrutinized, takes weeks of testing just to make sure that nothing else broke, and then something still breaks. Right? Unit tests stop that. What they do is what I've noticed personally is that you'll see a slightly slower start. So you'll see a little bit lower velocity in the beginning, but then the velocity just kind of picks up. You'll start to get faster and faster, not just with your unit testing, but with making changes to your code, with updating and adding to your code. When it's all under test, it becomes a whole lot easier because you're no longer locked into assumptions and or really any fear. Like there's no fear of changing the code because you know that if the code is going to break, you're going to get an immediate feedback on it. You're going to know that you broke the thing. Now, if all your code's not under test, obviously you're not going to have that. But the code that you do have under test, you're going to feel that security about, and you're going to be able to clean it up, and the code's just going to keep getting better and better. So I'd recommend put it in anything that is going to be around for a while. Put it in the non-trivial stuff. Don't test every single method. Like if your actual combat method is just multiplying, maybe don't test it. But if it's doing some other calculations, then put it under test, and you'll know when it breaks. It might take you an extra 5 minutes. It's going to save you a lot more time down the road when something goes wrong and you're trying to figure out why it went wrong. And then you're going back and redoing builds and debugging stuff. If you just have a test in there, you're going to know right away. You're going to know before it goes out of scope while it's still fresh in your mind, and you can find the right solution to it instead of long after where you go in, ping pong, and break somebody else's thing. So all the time. Let's see. What other questions were there? Doing a solo, would you still do extensive unit tests or any at all? Yes, I still do unit tests now on the solo stuff, especially for code that I know is likely to break, or that I'm not sure if it's likely to break, or I think it may break, and definitely get it on there. But I generally just try to put tests as many places as possible now. Let's see. Next one. Sorry, isn't about unit tests. Working on mobile game industry. Didn't study CS. Oh, very welcome. Thank you. Didn't need the yields. Rewrite. Sorry, I'm just looking through this. What other questions? Anybody have anything else? Can you create prefabs in the play mode test? I believe so. Pretty sure you can just instantiate them. To be honest, though, I haven't tried yet. I really just found out that play mode tests didn't suck, I don't know, a couple weeks ago. I was kind of shocked because before I had always done the play mode tests, and you had to go into the editor. You had to go through a whole manual process. And I mean, they worked, but it didn't get the speed. It didn't get the being able to do it all in code and understand it. Now you can, and that's somewhat new for me, so I need to study up on them a bit more myself, to be honest. But I'm pretty sure you could spawn a prefab. I can't think of any reason that you wouldn't be able to. Do you ever get rid of older tests, or you tend to keep a huge list of them? I only get rid of tests when they don't make sense anymore, when they're not valid, when they're not describing an actual thing that I want under test anymore. Like if the system completely changes and the test is no longer valid, I'll delete the tests or end up rewriting them or refactoring them to match what the new functionality is. In general, though, I haven't found any reason to get rid of unit tests. Feel free to ask other stuff non-unit test related, but if anybody has any other unit test questions too, feel free to ask those. I'll go for just a couple more minutes taking questions, and then I think I'll do this again sometime soon too. I'll probably turn this into a full edited video where I can go through step by step and show everything without all of the extra stuff. And then do another one of these on another subject next time if somebody's got another thing that they're interested in. And yeah, Rider is freaking awesome. So anybody who hasn't tried it out yet, it's not free, I know, but for me it was worth the money. It's freaking awesome. Yeah, just going to give a couple more minutes for any questions. Yes, multiple receives. So question, can you check multiple receives? You can. You can check received. You can check like the number of them. You can check that something received a take damage for 5 and then a take damage for 2. You can also do this. There's a received with any args. So say you have a method where the whole thing, you don't really care about all of the things, all of the parameters that are going into there. And I have a case like this where one of the parameters going in is an actual object that's created on the fly that I don't really have access to in my test. It's created along the way and passed into one of these methods that I want to test. And they're received with any args works great because it doesn't care. I have take damage with 2. This could be take damage -9999, and it wouldn't care. It's just checking that this was called and ignoring the arguments completely. And you could even do received 2 take damage calls, ignoring all arguments. So, and then this would pass like if I did that. So if I called twice, it would receive twice with any number, and this would pass. And if I deleted one, it would fail because it's only getting called once, and I'm receiving or requiring 2. Let's see. Can I show the add-ons used? So the only thing I really use that's outside of the built-in stuff is the nsubstitute DLL, and you can get that directly from the nsubstitute NuGet page. You just go onto here, download the latest version, and then go into this weird folder, docs, downloads, nsubstitute 2.0.3.0 zip lib.net 3.5. You take that DLL and you drop that into your plugins editor folder. You'll see this nsubstitute, and I've got it just like this with just editor checked. That is all you need to get the nsubstitute stuff working, so you can do substitute for and do the mocks and the received calls. Okay, so I just finished learning C#, new to game dev. Can't find any tutorials teaching Unity C# exactly, and how to create own custom 2D assets. Yeah, so I made a little tutorial that's a very, very basic C# intro tutorial for Unity. It's one that I used to teach 5th graders, kind of the basics of programming. It's obviously, it's still programming, it's still C#, and they have the benefit of me being right there and being able to ask questions. But it does go over a lot of what the fundamentals are and how everything works, and hopefully get you to the point where you can build a 2D game. Now, if you want to make code and art at the same time, I would recommend focusing on one or the other at first, because they're both extremely big specialties that take a lot of time to get really good at. So I'd kind of pick one, go with that first, get good at it, and then maybe do the other thing on the side. But trying to learn how to make 2D art and how to make code games at the same time is, I'd say, a little bit of overkill. Take somebody else's art, make your own game. That's what I would do first. And then once you get comfortable with that, start customizing the art, start working on the art. But I'd say learn how to build the game part first. The art can come later. Unless the art is what you really love and you're in it just for the art, then do that and do some visual scripting stuff and don't worry too much about the code. But if you're in it for just like general game development, the coding and development part is a way easier, way better path than trying to learn art, unless you love art and you're amazing at it. Like, I'd say some people are great at art, should be artists. Other people are great at code, should be coders. Very few people are great at both. I know, I can think of 2 guys that are really good artists and really good programmers, and they still consider themselves to be bad artists. So I'd pick one, focus heavily is generally my recommendation there. How often, so the question here was, how often do you write a test and it gives a false positive and bugs happen anyway? Quite a bit of the time, and that kind of comes in when I'm writing tests. I find that if I don't write enough tests, I will find that other tests are giving false positives. And if I write more tests and get those out there, I tend to find these things easier. So but false positives can be an issue, and it generally happens right at the beginning of the test. It's very rare that the test is right and then I've changed the code and then the test is passing even though it shouldn't, because the test is usually going to be segmented down to test one very specific thing, and I'll try to mock in as much stuff as possible with those substitutes so that there are as few side effects as possible, so that only that one thing is getting tested. But again, at the beginning, when I'm first writing the test, it does happen where I'll have a false positive. You guys saw that just a little while ago. It happens. You just have to keep an eye out for it, and don't assume that because your test passed that it's right. I mean, if you don't assert anything, your test is going to pass. If you assert the wrong thing, your test is going to pass. So usually one of the things, like the TDD way, is to write the test so that it fails and then make it pass, which I think probably helps with that a little bit. Of course, that's, again, not what I do most of the time, but sometimes I do write my tests like that. And actually, let me clarify real quick when I do that. And that's usually the second or third or fourth test of the thing. So usually I'll set up the system, I'll have the test kind of, I'm writing it as I'm going along. Once I have that first one done and I have the fundamentals of the code, then I'll start writing the tests that should all be failing, and I'll write them and then make them pass. I don't do it every time though, but it's a habit that I've been trying to get into that I find works pretty well, and I kind of like it. Just realized my lights are all not in pretty mode. I'll switch that. Okay, let's check out the next question. So I was wondering, when you work professionally with Unity, how much pure Unity is used and how much is external plugins? Is it worth to learn? Oh, okay. That's a good question. Most of the day-to-day stuff is working in just actual Unity and C# stuff. It's usually bigger architectural stuff or dealing with issues for interactions between systems. It's not very often asset store related things, but there are, without a doubt, asset store packages in, I think, every professional project I've ever worked on. There might be one or two that didn't have anything, but for the most part, everybody I know uses at least a little bit of asset store stuff. In general, though, it's mostly art and visual related things, or editor extensions, or little things to solve a specific problem. Because the problem that you'll run into with too many asset store plugins is that, well, they're all coded by different people without any consideration for each other, because you can't consider, like, hey, I'm making this thing, somebody else across the world in 2 years is going to make another thing, and you're not going to expect those to interact well necessarily. So you can run into a lot of interaction problems and performance problems and other stuff. So there are, like I said, always asset packs and things, but I would say it's mostly just normal C# development stuff. That's where the majority of the time is spent, at least. Let's see. Next question. What do you think about latest version? Are they too buggy compared to the previous? No, I haven't had too many problems. I mean, I occasionally run into random issues with new stuff, but I kind of expect that along the way. I think if you want a super stable build, you have to go to the LTS ones, but it hasn't really been an issue. There have been very few times where Unity bugs really bit me, and there haven't been any real recent ones. And the biggest problem I ran into lately was just an issue with switching back and forth between Rider and Visual Studio in Unity. That got a little buggy, but I don't even know that it was necessarily Unity's fault. I mean, obviously still occasionally get crashes and things, but overall, I think part of it too is I feel spoiled with Unity compared to all of the things that I used in the past, right? Like, it's still, even if it crashed and blew up my whole computer, my turnaround time is faster than a game build was for me ever in the past, right? Pre-Unity. Like, I don't have to wait an hour and use 100 systems to build. It's awesome, and I haven't had too many issues though. Post-processing on UI is something I don't think I've done with the latest post-process stack. Might be an interesting thing to cover though, but I haven't actually done that with the latest stack. What is unit testing? Oh, you'll have to scroll back to the beginning to find it out. It's a whole giant subject where I kind of been babbling on for like an hour or so, and I'll be doing lots of videos on it. But it's essentially a way to speed up your development long term for anything that's not big, and minimize bugs, reduce bugs, make your development life a little bit nicer and easier once you get used to it. But it does take some time getting used to it. Why do I think Unity is the best game engine to work with? I think there are a couple good reasons. One, I love C#. I used plenty of C++, plenty of C#, and C# just tends to be nicer. I just like it better. I like the code. I like the ability to architect things relatively cleanly. I like interfaces. I like the editor in general. The new rendering pipeline is pretty freaking sweet. And I guess I haven't seen any good arguments for any other engine being a better option, at least not for me. I got friends who really love Unreal, and I've worked plenty in Unreal, and it's an awesome engine, but given the choice, I almost always pick Unity. In fact, I can't think of a situation where I wouldn't pick Unity now. But I mean, also, I gotta admit, like, I'm a total Unity addict, so I'm super biased. This is not an unbiased opinion, and I really love C#, so I think it's a huge thing. How can you optimize pathfinding from any objects? Start by just making asynchronous calls. Don't overdo your pathfinding. Don't make calls that you don't need to, but make it all asynchronous. How many objects are we talking? And then let's see, what other questions? When using TDD, do you write all the interfaces without implementation first and then the failing test, or what is your general workflow? I don't. I know that, like, generally with TDD, you're supposed to write the tests, write the things, make it fail first, and then go from there. And like I said, I don't usually do that. A lot of the time, though, what I'm doing too is putting tests into existing projects that are not tested. They're not under unit tests, or they're maybe not the whole project, but some segment of code is not under test. So a lot of the time it's putting it under test, refactoring the code so that it's actually testable, and then getting all that working. So I can't really write the tests to fail, because I'm writing the tests and then I'm somewhat refactoring the code to pull off the parts that I actually need to test and get that kind of separated out. And I generally don't add the things, to the interface like that. I feel like I should. I feel like I probably should do some TDD, but I just haven't been able to get into it yet. Let's see. What was the next one? Are there reasons to start learning ECS yet? I mean, with the API changing and whatnot. I think if you have a specific use case is the kind of the core reason. Everybody I know generally is kind of in the same boat, where they just think, like, if there's a case where ECS, or DOTS as it is now, is going to help, like a subsystem where it's going to make a difference, where I can really get a payoff, then I'll dig in and learn it and use it for that. But I don't personally know anybody that's using it for much of anything right now. And a lot of that is, like you mentioned there, because the APIs change relatively quick, and a lot of the guys just kind of, they dove in really early, spent a bit of time with it trying to figure it all out, and then things keep changing and changing and changing, and nobody's really sure where it's going to end up or how it's going to look when it's done. So everybody I know is kind of just holding off unless they run into a very specific edge case. I think it's really neat, and it's going to enable some stuff, but it's also a totally different paradigm. And if it's one of those things where if it's not really applicable to your day-to-day work, it can feel like a bit of a distraction. So that's why I haven't really looked into it too much lately, because I just don't have a specific use case where it makes sense. And I'm obviously not going to go back in and refactor giant projects to a completely different system that's still in development. But I am interested in it, and hopefully we see some cool stuff come out of that. Let's see, what else do we have? What are some ways a user might break your game that you think about when you're thinking risks and mitigations to develop your game? Oh, that's funny. Where is that beautiful book? So I got this book here. I haven't looked at it in a very, very, very long time. It actually came from when I was at Sony, and I think I checked it out and completely forgot to return it. Sorry guys, I hope nobody wanted this. Exploiting games though is huge, right? Like, especially if you're doing a multiplayer game. Now, I want to preface this with, like, some games I just don't worry about cheating at all, right? Like, I don't worry about people breaking the game or cheating. Like, building a single player VR game, if you want to cheat and hack, I don't care. Like, have fun. Like, I'm not going to waste my time and energy making sure that you don't cheat and hack. But if we're doing something like an MMO, like the one I was talking about earlier, the Pantheon, cheating is super important. So I think about all kinds of different things. So the question was, what kind of what are some ways the user might break the game? So when it comes down to, oh, sorry if it was the book, Exploiting Online. This is a very old book, though. I don't know. There's probably plenty of other good books out there on exactly how to do it. I don't remember I don't know when this is from. Like I said, I got it a long time ago. But anyway, the kinds of things that I look out for in an online game are, well, first, making sure that nothing is client authoritative, right? Other than movement. So movement in a multiplayer game should be client authoritative, but checked. So it's validated on the client. The client moves around, but the server validates and says, hey, if this client is moving too fast or too far, and farther than we think it should, we're going to do something about it. We may not notify them. We may force them to go back. We might just log it and keep an eye on them and then ban them or whatever the situation is. But everything else we want to keep very server authoritative, and you want, really you want to keep everything server authoritative. Other than that movement, you don't want them to be able to say that they're doing damage to a thing or that they're even attacking, right? Like if a player says they're attacking, you don't say, hey, player, do the attack. You say the player is sending a request, they would like to attack. And then the server says, can they attack? Is this okay? And then those methods can be under test where it says, hey, this player has attacked, the last time they attacked was then, and this is the rate that they can attack at. They cannot attack. Let's log that out and keep track of what they're doing. So it's a lot of things like that. A lot of it is just keeping track of the state on the server and watching out for them sending up bad messages or bad data, and essentially just don't trust anything that the client says because it's always a lie. I don't know if that really answered the question very well. The other things, like if you're working on a single player game, it's a lot of bouncing around and trying just weird crap that players shouldn't do. Usually the bugs that don't get found are the ones where the developer thinks, well, why would anybody do that? Nobody would ever do that. And it's the first thing that the QA team does, is the thing that you wouldn't expect them to do or that they think that you're not expecting to do. So also just have some other people test your game and play things. So, or especially have kids. Like I have my kids do it, and it's great because they'll go in and try all kinds of random weird shit just because they want to try random weird shit, and they find bugs all the time. Let's see. Next question. A good alternative to Unet? I'm still kind of trying to figure that out. So there are a lot of options out there. I've used Photon before. I've used a couple of the other ones, and they're all okay. I mean, it depends on what it is that you want to do. I think if you want to build like Fortnite or your own FPS or an MMO that's like large scale, that's not just like a 4-on-4 or something like that, you're going to need some custom stuff that's closer to what the new system is, but I probably wouldn't go on top of that either because that's still all in flux. You're going to need something faster. My buddy Kyle always recommends building something on Enet. He's got his own awesome library on top of that works great. And we may talk about that sometime in the future too, if anybody's interested in that. But for general stuff, things like Photon work fine if you're doing a relatively, like I said, not too many people, too fast action. A lot of that is just that if you're going to build a fast action game with a lot of people, using a default network setup isn't going to be super scalable or the best performance. You're going to have garbage collection issues. You're going to have just general performance issues and rubber banding type things. And you can get around some of it, but if you really want the optimal performance, you have to really dig in and understand the networking stack. But if you want something simple, which again, most games work fine with something simple. Something like Photon totally works, and it's super easy to get going with. Or Bolt was another one that I tried that was pretty cool. I can't remember the other ones. If anybody else has recommendations, though, I'd love to hear about them. Or I'm sure other people in the chat would too. Does anybody have any other questions? Take a couple more before heading out. Let's see. Actually, it looks like questions are kind of dried up. I'll give like another minute. Oh, who do I watch on YouTube? I watch a lot of the popular Unity YouTubers for just when they're doing something that I don't know about. Any talk about a system that I haven't seen or a new system, those are awesome. I also really like to watch Uncle Bob videos, Bob Martin, on architecture and design patterns, all that kind of stuff. I'm a big fan of watching just design patterns and C# videos in general that are not specifically Unity. They don't always apply, and sometimes they're totally out there and like totally opposite of what I would normally do because they're going to cause garbage collection issues or whatever. But usually the overall architectural ideas really help and they tie in. Also, before I forget, I wanted to mention this right at the beginning. Another one is, let me pull it up real quick. I'm going to put it right onto the screen, but it's my buddy Chris's YouTube channel. If I can find it, which I have it, I'm subscribed to it, but it's all about mob programming. It's called Mob Mentality. Let me just get onto YouTube and search for it. If you're curious about what, I will find this thing. I'm subscribed, and YouTube is terrible at this. Mob Mentality on Mob Pro. Okay, it's the Mob Mentality Show. So if you're curious about just development practices and having a nice work environment where everybody's unit testing and learning and growing really well, highly recommend just checking out Chris's channel and the stuff that they talk about here. I also I've written emails about it. Some of you guys have probably seen it, about the mob programming. This is the guy that kind of showed me all the stuff, and I send everybody there because I find huge value in the stuff that they're doing and the things that they're teaching about coding together, teaching each other, being nice to each other as well, and having really good work environment. So if anybody is like struggling with their work environment sucks, fighting with other developers or people aren't getting along, I can't recommend anything higher than just going through, watching some of their content and seeing how they work and some of the tips and advice that they can give that you can kind of bring into your own setup and your own work. Jabril, yes, Jabril's cool dude. Got to go down and hang out with him down in his office not too long ago. I'd like to go back down there and do it again, but I kind of moved a little bit further away from him. But it'd be fun. Yeah, it's the first time I rode on one of those scooters that wasn't one of my kids and didn't feel like I was going to die. It's actually pretty nice. And he's a really cool dude. And he's all into electronics. It's awesome. Let's see, a couple other programmers. A couple other questions. Am I attending Unite? I don't know. I don't know if there's a Unite in the area, and there's a whole bunch of stuff. But the next time there's one close, I definitely plan on going. Fixed update runs at 50 times a second, but does it run at even intervals? If not, can you force it to? I think it's generally, it's supposed to run at fixed intervals. I'm not sure what it is you want to do that for, though, what you're trying to control the time of the fixed update loop for. If you want to send me an email, we could probably dive in and can try to help figure out what you're doing there. Do I have a recommendation for learning GOAP, systems and death? I'm not sure what that means. What is GOAP? I don't know. Oh, goal-oriented action planning. I don't. But I'm going to look up what that is and find out. It sounds kind of cool. Let's see. I'm a game programmer and designer looking to get into the industry from a first job. I've joined my local indie game dev group and working on a game jam. What do you recommend to... Definitely. So this is what do you recommend to get a job for the first job? The game developer, game programmer, and designer. First, if you really, really want to get in, sell yourself as the programmer side more. Game designers, when you open up a game design job, a lot more people apply. If it's a game programming job, if they want to hire a programmer, focus on the programming part. Tell them the programming part. Don't make sure that what you want to do is make sure that they don't think that you're going to come in and mostly want to change their design or not do what they want to do. You're going to want them to know that you're going to come in and build the game that they want. And if they have questions for design, you might help out, but recognize that they're the design team and they've already got some design there. Now, if you really want to do design stuff, that's not necessarily going to work, but getting in as a programmer and shifting to design is easy. You'll just not want to do it because you'll see the pay difference and be like, oh, I'll keep my programmer salary and just lightly contribute design-wise. But what I would recommend is do those game jams and do them well. Like, contribute well, communicate really well with everybody on the team and with the other people around. And if nobody in your group is actually doing real game development, next time try to find a group where you can join in with people who actually are working on games. So sometimes at game jams you'll find like a mix of team, or like hackathons or meetups and stuff. You'll find little segments of people, and sometimes a big segment of the people will be like all students who just hang out and they kind of isolate themselves and don't get in with the people who are working at the companies. And you really want to kind of mix in with those people, because if they see that you're working hard and you're interested and you're good, especially, they're going to start referring you. And if they see that you're just working hard and not a pain in the ass to work with, when junior opportunities come up, they'll also think about you and recommend you. I've done it all the time. I mean, a lot of the people I've recommended for jobs or met or hired were from meetups, and a lot of the jobs I've been offered or taken come from groups and stuff like that too. So I definitely go to those. Do them as much as you can. Try to interact with the community, and if you can build up the courage, which it's really, really terrifying the first couple times, trust me. Volunteer. If you can think of something that you've learned that's interesting, you think other people will be interested in, go to the local meetups and volunteer to talk about it. If you're very scared and it's your first time, just say, hey, I'd like to do like a little talk, like a 20 or 30 minute talk. Is there somewhere, sometime I could do that? And organizers at meetups almost always say yes. Like they're always looking for people to do talks. And if you want to do something, just tell them, let them know the situation, that you're scared, never done it before or whatever. They'll give you a little time usually, and you can go up there, talk about the thing that you learned, and you'll undoubtedly make new connections. And I don't think I've ever done a talk without having somebody try to hire me for a job for something. So that's a very common thing, right? Like, it's not me. It's not like I give amazing talks, but I think it happens for everybody I know that talks. Like, they go up and talk, and then there are people there that are at the groups that are generally just looking for developers to hire for projects, and they see somebody up there talking, and you kind of get a little bit of an extra boost just from talking. Literally just talking in public about the stuff that you're doing can help a lot. So do that. Don't be shy. If you are shy, just remember everybody there is just a nerd that's into game development and likes the same stuff, and almost all of them are scared and terrified to go up there too. The first 3 or 4 times I went up, I was like completely drenched in sweat. Soaked in sweat while I'm up there the entire time, like sitting there for an hour just trying not to pass out, right? And then, but afterwards, everybody's cool, like nobody's a dick, everybody's nice, and it's like, hey, that's awesome, and you get to talk and you meet a lot of people. So that's what I would go with. Let's go on to the next couple questions. Okay, good answers. Keep making your own projects. Also, when you make projects, just post them online, share them. Show that you've done stuff. I mean, obviously, if it's totally terrible, don't show it. But if you got anything worth showing, just show it, because people want to see that you've made something. Even if you made a mediocre game, an okay game, the fact that you made it and it built and you compiled it and released it, put it up on Simmer.io or some other web sharing. Rocco's site is awesome. Go for Simmer. But put it up there. People will like it, and you'll get a lot more credit just from doing that, just from being willing to share your stuff. It's again all back into the getting a job. So let's see. +1, yep, programmers definitely easier to get a job than designers. That's probably going to be the case forever. And a lot of that too is that most people don't know what game designers do. Most people, like, I ask my wife all the time. I just give my buddy who's a game designer a crap because you say, hey, he's a game designer. He just plays video games all day, right? But I mean, game designers, there's a big variety. Sometimes a game designer might just sit and play games all day. That's not a very good game designer. A game designer, though, should be able to come up with all kinds of system stuff, or they're usually either systems designers or content designers that are going in and either creating the world, laying things out, or creating the systems. Or sometimes the teams are smaller or the people are more versatile and they're doing both. But they should be able to, they're writing docs and writing up designs, writing up spreadsheets, usually like figuring out the formulas for things. There's a lot to game design, and I think most people just think like, I play games, I want to be a game designer, I'm a game designer, and then they apply. So that's why you get like a million applications for any game design job. Let's see, more questions. Math program, get in the studio. Somebody answered Dr. Ed's question, but I don't see it. So let's keep going down. Coroutines. There's a lot of talk about coroutines. By the way, so I'll talk probably more about these later. Coroutines are cool for small amounts of stuff. Just remember that they don't scale. So if you're going to run a coroutine on one thing, awesome. If you want to run a coroutine on something and spawn 1,000 of that thing, don't do it. Find another solution, because you're going to start causing problems for your code. Just something to think about. That's all. But coroutines, yeah, I use them, but just use them sparingly. Let's see, if you make a filter in your... Okay, let's get to this question. Night Steel asked, how much do you usually plan out a game before you start developing it? Dramatically varies from game to game. It depends a lot on the scope and the timeline of the game, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So if it's a short game, I've had games where I spent half an hour planning, and I'm just like, okay, I'm going to plan it out. I kind of understand the whole scope in my head. And I mean, I say I spent half an hour planning, but that's like the time writing things down. A lot of the planning, just like a lot of coding, just happens all in your head, right? You're thinking it through, you're figuring out what you're going to do, and you're not formally writing it down, but you're planning it and then actually putting it onto paper. Now that becomes a much bigger thing when you're working with a team of people on a much bigger project. In that case, the planning, I still don't do a whole lot of planning before writing code. I guess I feel like I like to get in there and start putting some things together right away and figure out kind of a plan for where I want to be, but I don't plan out all of my code. Now, I used to do that where I would write out, like I'd be like, okay, here's my system. I'm going to figure out what the objects are, what the interfaces are, and start building that together. And I do it all on paper. What I found, though, was I was wrong every single time. Like, I never was right, and I was never close. And every time I did it, what I would do is I would find myself coding things that I didn't like to match the interface that seemed right on paper. Now, what works better, and what we talked about a little bit earlier, was the testing. So if we write a test for it, then we can write the interface around the test and things make a bit more sense. Because then I'm testing the actual behavior of the thing. I'm testing the full workflow. So, yeah, I guess I don't do a whole lot of testing. What I like, or a whole lot of planning, but I do like to talk the things through with other developers. So I could write all of this crap out on paper, come up with like 3 different designs and ideas. It's still not going to be as good as if I just get another programmer friend, hop on a call, and we spend 20 minutes just talking through the different scenarios, especially if they're aware of the code and the context. If it's somebody else that's on the team that's working in that same code, and you can talk to them about it and just literally just talk through the problems and what you want to do, you're going to probably come up with a much better solution and a better path than if you just try to figure it out on your own in a corner. Because it's just more minds, more eyes, and more thoughts about the possible different ways we could do things. Just more experiences all kind of coming together. And again, that's this the thing I've got right up here, this mob programming. This is exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about. If you're in there with other people and you have multiple eyes on your code, stuff's going to get good. It's just going to be better. Let's see, anything else? So yeah, by the way, a little bit of talk about input and fixed update. So yeah, generally you'll want to read the input in update, and then you could act upon it in fixed update. And there's the whole new input system. I still am 50-50 on it. I'm waiting until it's finalized to really start using it in things. I've done a video on it. It seems kind of neat, but I feel like it's probably going to change a little bit more before I drop it into a real project. I'll take this last question too before we drop out. And it was just, how often do you create editor tools to help in development? I'd say probably about once a month. And they're not always big. A lot of the time it's just, half an hour writing a script to automatically import something or automatically update a list of things. Sometimes it's a custom editor window. Sometimes it's a completely custom tool. And a lot of the time it's just something like adding a context menu to a script where you can add the little context menu attribute and make it call a method. Or you could, or I'll add like an on-validate that just calls and updates things when it's validating, or maybe put a button in there with a custom editor. But it's somewhat common, and it's really when it comes down to a process that I don't think I should have to do again manually. And that's kind of the idea. In fact, you know what? I have a beautiful slide right here somewhere on one of these many screens. If I can find it. Is it this one right here? Yep, there we go. This one. This is from my old talk. And this is really from my buddy Chris again, when I stole. And I don't know where he got it from. But it's a list of, or a chart showing how much time you can save by automating a task. And this is how long the task takes and how long until it pays off. And it basically, I guess the whole idea is, if I can automate the thing and not have to do it again, and it's something that I'm doing regularly, especially if I'm doing it daily, like if it's anything that's daily or 5 times a day, if I'm doing something 50 times a day, I'm automating it right away. But usually the second or third time I have to do something that's annoying is when I try to automate it. Unless I know that like this is the last time I'm going to do it. But if I'm going to keep doing it, try to automate it and get that out of my workflow so that I can focus on the important stuff. And really automating away all of the boring, tedious stuff is super important, I think. And it really keeps you productive and keeps you doing stuff. Because if you have to keep going back, and it's kind of the point of the unit test, right? To stop it so you don't have to go back and manually retest these things. So anything that we can get rid of manual is the way to go. Cool. I think that's about it for questions, and I probably should get going. We've been on for about 2 hours, but I definitely want to do another one of these. It looks like people have some interest and we'll get lots of questions. So maybe I'll just start doing some Q&A ones and other subjects. If anybody has recommendations for stuff that they want to see a live stream about, just shoot me an email or drop a comment below. I'll check the comments later today, and then I check my emails every day or so. So send me that, and we'll do it on the next one, maybe. Do something cool and interesting. Maybe we can even talk to Chris about mob programming and pair programming and stuff. That'd be a lot of fun, too. All right, thanks, everybody. Again, I'll do a full video of the unit testing stuff, an edited one that shows kind of all of these things in a nicely cleaned up package. So if you want to see that all, you'll be able to get to that later. And I have another one coming out in a couple days. It's not that. It's all about just peeling off code for a big project. So you got a big project with lots of mono behaviors, and you need to peel stuff off and make those testable. It's kind of confusing because it's about testing, but it's not going to be this. It's not really fundamentals of testing, but I will cover a lot of those in it as well. Just kind of showing how to rip apart big classes and make them into small testable parts, because it's something I've been doing recently a lot. Anyway, thanks again. Really appreciate everybody for coming here. Bye, and thanks.